Molt bona tarda, benvinguts a aquest acte d'inauguració de la Barcelona School of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Me'n passaré l'anglès, que com sabeu aquest és una escola d'estiu que es fa en anglès. So, in the name of the CCCB, I would like to thank you and welcome you all to Barcelona, those of you who are here in the audience and those of you who are following us on site. On behalf of the CCCB, I would like to say that this is a great honor to be hosting this opening session of the Summer School of the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and I would like to thank most warmly Umut for promoting this important event for many different reasons, and also to thank the Blanquerna University and the IBEI at the Pompeu Fabra University to think of the CCCB as a space for this opening. For us, it's very important to be hosting this event because it joins our effort to promote the critical debate on key issues of contemporary society and mainly international relations and the important issues at stake at the global stake. So I think it's very important for us, for the CCP, to be joining efforts together with the local universities in order to promote the quality of public debate in our society. We really look forward to the session this afternoon, and this is a very special session for us because it's also an homage to our dear friend, the late Fred Halliday, who was a very long and good friend for many years at the CCP. He was an advisor for us for the Middle East and opened up the doors of the CCP to many different Middle Eastern cities. We traveled together with him to Beirut, to Istanbul, to Tehran, to Mecca, to Baghdad, and to Dubai. And he brought to Barcelona many different intellectuals, filmmakers, writers, poets, journalists, and many different important figures of that region whose image in Barcelona only comes under the shadow of violence, stereotype, and usually also war. So it was very important for us to showcase the cosmopolitan cultural life of those cities and that particular region. Fred, as many of you know, was a giant. He was probably a fragile giant who combined an enormous deep knowledge of that region, of the Middle East, with a generosity and an immense friendship to those of us who were lucky enough to be close to him. So it's a very important session for us tonight, and we're very delighted and very grateful to Umut and those of you who have made possible this session. So thank you very much, and look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Well, dear friends and dear friends of Fred Halliday, I would like to make just 2 points in my intervention. And the first one, I would like to express our satisfaction, the satisfaction of the IBEA, for being able to join efforts with Blanquerna and with other institutions that will collaborate at different sessions of the summer school. Barcelona has been always asking for attention to the Mediterranean problems. And what's clear to everybody is that to join efforts will produce better results than to go in separate ways or paths. That was proposed by an economist called Sargent Florence, that 40 years ago was well known for his theory on industrial location and his ideas on urban economics. Sargent Florence, I wonder whether he was modest enough, but proposed the concept of Florence effect, playing with the ambiguity of the city of Florence and the name of the author of the idea. The Florence effect was better explained by Sergeant Florence with the story of a shoemaker in the medieval times of Florence that had a prosperous business, but one day discovered that another shoemaker had opened another workshop at the same street. Furious, went there and asked him to retire, to close the workshop. The other shoemaker refused, and the first one killed him. And then the justice of Florence condemned to death the killer. But you know, the story has not the end here. The son of the first shoemaker took the business of his father, and the son of the second one as well, and discovered that, so above all the first one, that the results of the business were even better than before. So they don't refuse a third shoemaker to establish his trade in the same street, and eventually the street was the street of shoemakers, because the joining efforts of all the shoemakers create a market, create advantages that, because one Florentine, citizen of Florence, that wanted to acquire shoes only had to go to the street and choose in the difference between the different shops. I would like that in Barcelona we had the Florence effect in relation to the institutions that are nurturing the studies of international relations, to collaborate, to invite new institutions to establish in Barcelona will be a good signal of prosperity and improving our quality as institutions, and bolster the platform of services in international relations and international studies that is now Barcelona. The second point will be devoted to the summer school itself. The summer school has chosen the Mediterranean area and the Middle East, and that's very convenient if we are doing the school in Barcelona, a Mediterranean city. The summer school covers a lot of very interesting today momentous problems. For instance, gender and feminine in the Middle East, the return of the military, migrations, and not to mention the roundtables. The roundtables devoted the first one to energy. Energy and the Mediterranean is a very important topic. Tensions and vulnerabilities in the Mediterranean Sea, and the rise of sub-state actors in the area of study. I think that is an array of topics that can make the summer school interesting for a lot of students and scholars even. Let's hope that the courses will cover our own expectations. It's the first time we open the summer school of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. Will not be the last one. We look forward to an increasing number of attendants and an increasing offer of topics related to the area of study. I hope that not only the expectations of the organizers, but the expectations of the attendants will be covered. Good luck to all the attendants of this summer school, and enjoy the debates, but enjoy as well the life in Barcelona. That is a charming city. Thank you very much.
Good evening, dear Judith Carrera, Director of the CCCB, dear Nancy Serra, President of the eBay, dear Professor Deniz Kandiyoti, dear Professor Umut Othkirimli, dear scholar and students, dear friends. On behalf of Dr. Josep Lluís Micó, Dean of the Blanquerna School for Communication and International Relations, who can unfortunately not be present, I welcome you to the keynote lecture, which inaugurates this first edition of the Barcelona Summer School on the Mediterranean and the Middle East, and the Fred Halliday Award. As academic vice dean for business and institutions, relations with the institutions, it's a pleasure to address you with some brief words. Although my academic and professional background lies not in the field of international relations, but in the audiovisual industry, I'm fully aware of the relevance of this new initiative. It not only aims at strengthening Barcelona's position as Mediterranean capital, but also at profiling eBay and Blanquerna as two important academic institutions with expertise in these fields. Let me add that as professional film director, I am profoundly convinced that a closer collaboration between international relations and audiovisual studies could be a win-win. Whereas cinema is in need for well-researched analysis and scientifically sound narratives, the audiovisual format would allow international relations to reach new audiences beyond its mainly academic parish. Allow me to thank, in this occasion, Dr. Umut Othkirimli, sorry, because it's a difficult name for me, at least. I suppose mine is difficult for you. Director of the Blanquerna eBay Summer School, and professor at both institutions, to put this initiative in motion, as well as eBay, and in particular its director, Jacint Jordana, that is not here, hope you will improve soon, and his team, to the trust deposited in Blanquerna to co-organize this event. It is a pleasure to work with them. A special word of appreciation also to our institutional interlocutor, Professor Onno Cero, Director of our Blanquerna International Relations degree, and his team. Some of them are here. At the same time, I acknowledge the institutional support of our partners and friends in Barcelona, IEMET, CIDOP, CCCB, and Diplocat. The Blanquerna School, linked to the Ramon Llull University, is a relative newcomer in the field of international relations. Traditionally a school for communication, our undergraduate degree in international relations was created only 12 years ago as a multilingual and multidisciplinary academic training, following an Anglo-Saxon model. Regional studies are an essential part of our academic curriculum. Thus, MENA, Mediterranean and North Africa and the Middle East region are the most prominent and demanded areas of specialization. Not only because Barcelona and Catalonia are, of course, intrinsically Mediterranean, but also because these regions have, and will continue to have huge transcendental geopolitical and geoeconomic relevance. In this context, the concept of history used by the great scholar Fernand Braudel is always very useful. He divided history into three movements: what moves rapidly, what moves slowly, and what appears not to move at all. It's in this Braudelian sense that the tensions derived from the history of social, political, and economic inequalities inside and between these regions are nowadays exacerbated, among others, by the recent Ukraine conflict and its impact on regional food and energy security, but also more long-term or structural challenges. In particular, climate change will have a long-lasting impact on the inhabitants of this region. The redefinition of the new security and defense paradigm by the adoption of NATO's new strategic concept in Madrid increases the risk for enhanced tensions between NATO, Russia, and China with Mediterranean and the Middle East as one of the regional playgrounds and interconnections. This summer school offers, therefore, a unique opportunity to broaden our horizon and deepen our knowledge via amazing courses taught by leading international scholars. By decoding these processes, actors, and issues, we want to reconstruct the human security paradigms and narratives that should allow us to contribute to building the defense of peace in the minds of women and men. Thank you for your attention, and welcome to Barcelona to the ones who are not from here. Thanks.
Okay. Well, by the end of the next 1.5 hours, you will have enough of me because I'll play the role of Hugh Jackman in the Oscars or Ricky Gervais in Golden Globes, you know, coming back and forth. But unlike Hugh Jackson, I'm not doing dance strips. And unlike Ricky Gervais, I'm not going to go into politically incorrect jokes. And I wanted Deniz Kandiyoti, Deniz Hoca, whom I consider my professor, to be here while I start this presentation of the school. Well, actually, we were supposed to be, there were supposed to be 2 chairs here, and we were going to be speaking to each other. But thanks to British Airways, who managed to cancel double book 1 flight to Barcelona. We lost so far 1 instructor and 2 speakers. We are hoping that one of them will be coming tomorrow. So I was thinking, we were discussing about this, and you know that Britain, actually, this was something that was first used for the Spanish Empire in the 17th century. But in the 18th, from the 18th to 20th century, Britain was referred to as the empire on which the sun never sets. And the Spanish version apparently is, if I'm wrong, there are several people who could correct me here, El Imperio donde nunca se pone el sol. This was used for, from 18th century onwards, for Queen Victoria's Britain mostly. But we realized that actually the Britain of Alexander Boris de Pfeffel Johnson won, and hopefully last. The empire on which the sun never sets turned into the small island on which the sun never rises. And that's why, unfortunately, we have Deniz and other speakers online. I would like to, before introducing Deniz Kandiyoti, who hardly needs an introduction anyways, just to say that I will, of course, come to Fred's legacy and the link between this school and Fred in the second part, before introducing the second part. But I would like to say that I'm very, very happy that we managed to bring this collaboration into life between two leading institutions of Barcelona. And this would not have been possible without the director of eBay, Jacint Jordana, and the coordinator of our international relations program, On Nocero. So they are the ones that first actually deserve a thanks. But then let me finish, because I have a long list, but I'll be quick. This is really this school actually was the idea of Fred. And it was first launched in 2008, but then Fred got really sick, and very quickly. And also there was the aftermath, it was the aftermath of the austerity, the financial crisis of 2008, and the school basically never managed to take off the ground. So we decided with Jacint and Onno to kind of resuscitate this great idea that Fred had, and combine it with an award in Fred's honor. And we've done that as an amazing team, as the outcome of an amazing teamwork. I mean, I'm just the name there, but without our instructors, Nadiel Ali, Yazid Saik, Michel Pach, Leif Stenberg, Katarina Dallacura, this school would not have existed. Without our collaborating institutions, and the list is actually quite large, from CCCB, obviously, who is hosting us, to IEMED, to PRIO, Cyprus Center, CIDOB, the Aga Khan University's Institute for Muslim Civilizations, Diplocat, and Union for Mediterranean. These are our only these are the official collaborators of this summer school. So we are the Barcelona Summer School, and at least that's our aim. I would like to thank the organizing committee, Mariona, Yoret Roda, Eduard. Of course, without Eduard, Mediterranean, come on. From eBay, my colleague and office, neighbor, and compatriot, I must say, Elizabeth Johansson Nogues. Then the communication department, and here I will refer to Mariona once again, and Helena Aregi, without whom, nothing could have happened. You know that, usually in these things, the award winners, I'm not a winner or anything, but the award winners usually finish by thanking to their families and partners and, the loved ones. And even though in this case, obviously, I had support from my families, various families in various countries, and partner in Turkey, I'm not going to finish with, special thanks, because this is not it. This school has one significant other, definitely. And that person has made everything possible. And I think this is the time that will be, an applause and appreciation will be needed. That person is Carlos Sanchez, without whom none of this would have happened. So, my dear Hojam, who is sitting in, was it Hampstead in London?
Thereabouts.
Highgate, I think, right? Neighbor to Fred, long-time Fred of friends of Fred as well. So who else then introduced the summer school with Professor Deniz Kandiyoti? If there are, for the, let's just say, younger generation, and I'm not doing ageism, no politically incorrect jokes. Professor Kandiyoti is Emeritus Professor of Development Studies at the School of Oriental and African Studies, but she was also between 1969 and 74 in Middle East Technical University in Istanbul, in Ankara, and one of the first professors of Boğaziçi University Sociology Department, 1974-1980. So we call senior professors in Turkish, hoca, which is an Arabic word actually, if I'm not wrong. And for senior professors like Deniz Hanım, we usually say the hoca of hojas. She is the hoca of hojas. Her areas of research span from Turkey, post-Soviet Central Asia, Afghanistan, the thematically state, gender, and power in the broader Muslim world. She made key theoretical contributions which are referred like, compulsory citation on patriarchy, patriarchal bargain, male dominance. She's the author of Concubines, Sisters, and Citizens, and several edited collections. The last one is actually with Nadia El Ali, who's teaching in our summer school, and Catherine Spellman Putz in 2019, Gender, Governance, and Islam. I won't even begin to list her articles and other publications, but one thing that I would like the last things that I would like to mention is that Deniz Kandiyoti is acted as a consultant for United Nations Women, UN Women, UNDP, UNESCO, OSCE, British Council, among others, and monitored the gender effects of Arab uprisings from 2011 as a guest editor for a special section in Open Democracy 50/50. Without further ado, I leave the floor to Professor Kandiyoti.
It gives me great pleasure to participate in the inaugural event of the Fred Halliday Award and Barcelona Summer School of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. It is a matter of great regret that I cannot be with you in person and you have to make do with a hologram. I would like to thank eBay and the wonderful colleagues there for giving me the opportunity to honor our late friend and colleague Fred Halliday and to reflect on questions that have dominated my scholarly career. A renewed interest in the Middle East and North Africa was sparked when youth and women, alongside men, flooded the streets and squares in protest from Tunisia to Yemen during the Arab uprisings of 2011. Preceded by protests on the streets of Tehran in 2009, and followed by the Gezi events in Turkey in the summer of 2013, the Arab Spring was one of the early precursors of a wave of resistance against authoritarian governments and of demands for democratic rights. Those of us who were monitoring the gender effects of these uprisings, as I was at the time on a webzine Umut mentioned called Open Democracy, were struck by the many paradoxes and conundrums revealed by these events. On the one hand, women's militancy and leadership was in full view, as were male constituencies acting in solidarity against acts of organized gender-based political violence, and there were many. Yet, in the immediate aftermath of these popular uprisings, Islamist successor regimes in Tunisia, Egypt, Libya made it their priority to circumscribe women's rights, bringing them in line with their interpretation of Sharia law. One of the questions that preoccupied me at the time was why societies beset by a myriad of intractable economic and social problems had instantly chosen to propel women's rights into the headlines. What I wondered accounted both for the salience and extreme fragility of women's rights platforms in our region. Now, I realize full well that I'm posing this question at a time when anti-gender politics is at the heart of right-wing populist resurgence, a resurgence that presages new threats to many hard-won rights. Nonetheless, it is to history that we must turn for an understanding of the specific context that we are dealing with. Returning to the Arab Spring, apart from the fact that Islamic movements were the only foci of opposition left standing after decades of repression, one explanation of the outcomes I referred to was the contention that the women's rights agenda never achieved legitimacy at the popular level. Without the trusteeship of authoritarian leaders such as Atatürk, Bourguiba, or Nasser, or even more blatantly dictatorial leaders such as Saddam Hussein and Muammar Gaddafi, the expansion of women's rights, the argument went, would have no popular base and therefore no electoral appeal. Now, if the implicit assumption behind this argument is that the societies in question had remained locked into unchanging traditions of a relentlessly misogynistic nature, then the spectacle of the mobilized, young, mixed gender citizenries of the Arab Spring told yet another story. The real question is why aspirations for inclusive democracy, which continue to manifest themselves against all odds, come up against power configurations that are unlikely to translate these into governance outcomes. And why is it that the women's rights agenda and gender justice platforms are laden with seemingly insurmountable obstacles in our region? To tackle these complex questions, I shall take you down memory lane to a period when I started out as a young scholar in the 1970s. The Middle East field was at the time dominated on the one hand by modernization theory, the social scientific backdrop to the Cold War years, and the stubborn Middle Eastern or Islamic exceptionalism. Even as Latin American dependency theories started making inroads into the social sciences, studies of the Middle East remained locked into the ahistorical tropes of tradition and modernity. Critical reactions were soon to follow. The best known, Edward Said's Orientalism, published in 1978, dissected the discourses deployed to establish the positional superiority of the West versus the Orient. Others trained new political economy lenses on the modes and temporalities of the region's incorporation into colonialism and capitalism. In the United Kingdom, where I had been based since the 1980s, the late Roger Owen, Talal Assad, and Sami Zubaydah started the Middle East Study Group as a collective aiming to develop critical perspectives on the Middle East. Fred Halliday was a lifelong valued member of this community and made key contributions that we continue to benefit from to this day. As a member of the group and as a feminist, I was particularly troubled by the textual doctrinal bias in studies on the status of women and women's rights. The lack of attention to processes of state formation, to nationalisms and their diverse appropriations of Islam, prompted me to put together a collection titled Women, Islam and the State, published in 1991, more than a generation ago. One of the key problems, I argued, lay in the ways women were incorporated into modern concepts of citizenship. A common denominator of post-independent reform efforts was the assumption that the expansion of women's access to education, to the labor force, and to public space could be justified in the service of a greater good, the creation of a stronger, more productive nation that enlisted women to its project of modernization and national development. However, the equal rights granted by constitutions were, except for Turkey that adopted a secular legal system since the 1920s, curtailed by personal status laws embedded in Sharia legislation. Upon independence, almost all member states of the Arab League, 21 out of 22 states, with Tunisia being the exception, shared family laws that privileged adult men and set limits to women's autonomy in matters related to marriage, divorce, and child custody, not to mention that the principle of male guardianship is still embedded in state legislation in many countries. The developmental phase of state building was meant to deliver goods and services to citizens in return for loyalty to the ruling regime and to the nation, understood as an entity that transcends the bonds of kinship, community, sect, or ethnicity. Wresting the control of women from these subnational and highly patriarchal entities represented a major break, backed up by policies for universal education, employment, suffrage, and social welfare. However, some of the fundamental cultural premises underlying gender relations and sexuality remained untouched, especially the taboo issues of body politics, gender-based violence, and sexualities. The state feminisms that underwrote the developmentalist agenda were swept away by the neoliberal transformations of the 1980s, giving way to the rise of both Islamist oppositional movements and the surge of state-sponsored religiosity. In Turkey after the 1980s military coup, in Egypt throughout the post-Nasser years, and I could multiply these examples everywhere. The salience of religion in politics had been bolstered by the failure and corruption of the statist military nationalist regimes, the inspiration of the 1979 Iranian Revolution, and later the collapse of the Soviet Union. Women who had previously occupied a broad spectrum of political positions found themselves operating in an increasingly restricted discursive universe where Islamic actors were either absorbed into state structures or were the only organized opposition. Women's rights advocates were often drawn into unenviable bargains, either playing along with governments that were mired to different extents in corruption and autocracy, or trying to find virtue in Islamic oppositions that offered little room for maneuver on the rights front. Nonetheless, the phase of state-led development had left behind cadres of educated professional women who continued to be active in women's movements and later on in an expanding NGO sector. This laid the foundation of the resilience of these movements to this day. We must acknowledge here that the geopolitical dice was uniquely loaded against women's rights advocates in the Middle East and North Africa through a series of ill-fated global encounters. The first was the encounter with the global institutionalization of standards and mechanisms for gender equality through the workings of the United Nations system and the major international donors. To the extent that state apparatuses intended to promote and monitor women's rights in the MENA region had been co-opted by authoritarian regimes and staffed by their female clients. One of the immediate results of the Arab Spring was that they collapsed as soon as these regimes fell, as did the government-approved, donor-funded NGO sector. Furthermore, the democracy promotion agenda of the international donor community meant that compliance with gender conditionalities, such as creating dedicated national machineries to monitor gender equality or increasing women's political representation, represented a relatively soft option for authoritarian regimes in comparison to moving towards more genuine democratic participation. Progress on women's rights issues could thus be deployed as a democratic facade of non-democratic regimes, as is evident these days, even in the most conservative Gulf states. An even more devastating encounter took place in the context of the so-called war on terror following the 9/11 events in the United States. The invocation of oppressed Muslim women as part of the rationale for military interventions in Afghanistan, Iraq, and beyond had provoked a predictable outrage in the face of such naked instrumentalism. This resulted in a cottage industry of critiques of feminism as imperialism, a critique that continues to dominate Northern academia. In this perspective, the movement against gender-based violence in the Middle East could be interpreted as a collaboration between upper-class feminists and a brutal security state colluding around a class-specific politics of respectability that marginalizes and criminalizes working-class masculinities and demonizes the so-called Arab street. A similar logic was applied to the area of LGBTQT rights, with some scholars locating imperial justifications for war in the Middle East in so-called homo-nationalist discourses that present Islam as inherently intolerant and violent, as the very antithesis of an allegedly liberal West. Paradoxically, scholars zealously condemning imperialism may have inadvertently contributed to the creation of a space for a bandwagon that every populist government with a nativist agenda, whether Hindu, Muslim, or Christian, readily jumped on. One of the most common and effective tools of masculinist authoritarianism is a language of populism that demonizes part of the citizenry by marking them out as dangerous or undesirable others, usually by tarnishing them through an alleged association with the imperialist West. Never mind that the allegedly liberal West is itself the scene of a proliferation of alarmist discourses about the endangered heterosexual family as the national norm, and we are a handful of days away from the repeal of Roe versus Wade in the United States, with more threatened to come. Anti-gender ideology, carefully cultivated since the 1990s, is alive and well in the heartland of Europe and beyond. However, I want to end my talk with a final paradox that gives me cause for optimism. The top-down reforms I referred to earlier that initially remained a dead letter outside the relatively thin layer of urbanites are, after decades of societal transformations involving changes in consumption and leisure patterns, in family structures and lifestyles, are finding an echo in new generations. Autocratic systems of rule, whether they claim to derive their legitimacy from Islam or not, are no longer able to contain the aspirations of their citizenry, as demonstrated by continuing instances of popular militancy, both preceding and following the Arab uprisings. Women's movements that started out as an urban elite phenomenon have now blossomed into mass movements that have the potential to mobilize varied constituencies, cutting across class, ethnicity. We have seen many examples of that. This is precisely what mandates reliance on a new politics of masculinist restoration as a blunt instrument for the maintenance and reproduction of a patriarchy that has become a pillar of the type of autocracies I have been referring to. This politics requires systematic indoctrination, greater surveillance, and higher levels of intrusion into citizens' lives. Yet there is both an irony and a paradox in the fact that a form of rule that explicitly targets the private domain and the policing of gender relations risks bringing personal liberties and gender issues closer to the heart of democratic struggles than ever before. This reality has given rise to new coalitions and cross-gender alliances in recognition of the fact that the politics of gender has now become a key stake in anti-authoritarian resistance. For those of us who have long argued for the need to de-orientalize scholarship on gender in Muslim countries and their diasporas, this conjuncture has driven home the message that we must finally locate the politics of gender where it belongs, at the front lines of struggles for democracy and human rights, questions that engage Fred Halliday's lifelong intellectual and political passions. Thank you.
Well, I mean, this was an amazing tour de force, and time-wise, we are doing really well. And if possible, and if you have any questions, we can take 2 or 3 questions right now, while Deniz is just, you know, relaxing a bit. So, any questions? Well, that's usually a good thing, I think. Okay, so then I think we will slowly move to the second part, hocam.
Right. Bye, everyone.
So you know the drill. You will switch
Yes.
to YouTube, and
Yeah.
we will continue with the second part. Thank you very much
Okay.
again.
Thank you.
Okay, so as I said, this event has 2 very much related parts. Yes, the school was the idea of Fred, and after just a brief span of life of 2 years, it kind of withered away, to use the Marxist terminology that Fred would like us to use, I guess. And then, yeah, I mean, there's a personal element here too, actually, because, you know, well, you will hear it from himself, why he chose Barcelona to spend his life to relocate. Something similar happened to me without at all planning it. Some personal reasons drove me here in 2018, reconnect with my family here, and chose Barcelona as my home. So, you know, we keep having in our family dinners occasions referring to Fred all the time, and that family is growing bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger in many ways. So we decided, actually, not in only this personal spirit, but of course, you know, the importance of Fred. And Judith Carrera mentioned that Fred was a very, very prominent and active member of Barcelona's cultural life, intellectual life. And here, I was actually going to wait until the closing, but I would like to actually add to my huge list of thanks Judith, Seska, and Elizabeth for really offering us this opportunity. But it was, I think, it was the natural place to be, because, you know, when we met with Judith the last time, we realized that actually the first time we met was through Fred on a conference panel on the, well, series of panels on Mediterranean cities. And I was one of the speakers of Istanbul. I was much younger, I had more hair, less weight, but, you know, it was still the same. And there are pictures at Carmen's possession that would actually show me really, I mean, you know, I can't recognize myself. So we had the idea with Jacinthe of creating this award to reminisce, to recognize and basically, you know, to remember Fred's legacy, Fred's relationship with Barcelona. And we thought that he would have wanted us to basically, you know, recognize and support mostly a mid-career scholar whose research focuses on the study of the Mediterranean and the Middle East. I'm going to be talking about the award later, but I would like to now introduce our second guest speaker, and we agreed that I will just introduce her, saying that our second guest is Maxime Molyneux, Professor of Sociology at University College London, and she will explain why she is the guest speaker here now. The Zoom business, we'll see. I mean, you know, it's always possible. But at least Zoom is not a British company. I think that, and this is the part that I have to be maybe doing dance tricks, but I'm not going to try. But at least Zoom is not a company. I think that, and this is the part that I have to be maybe doing dance tricks, but I'm not going to try.
Umar, thank you so much.
Maxine, you have to mute the YouTube. But at least Zoom is not a...
I think I'm out. I think I'm out.
I think that, and this is the part that I have to be maybe doing dance tricks, but I'm not going to try.
Umar, thank you so much.
Maxine, you have to mute the YouTube.
I'm trying.
But at least Zoom is not a...
I think I'm out. I think I'm out.
I think that, this is the part that I have to be maybe doing dance tricks, but I'm not going to try.
Umar, thank you so much.
Maxine, you have to mute the YouTube.
I'm
But at least Zoom is not a...
I think I'm out. I think I'm
I
out.
think that, this is the part that I have to be maybe doing dance tricks, but
Thank you so much.
Maxine, you have to mute the YouTube.
I
blame British Airways and Boris Johnson. He would have too, by the way.
about that, folks. Okay, can you hear me? Perfect. Well, finally, we have the technology working. Apologies for that. Okay, so first let me say a very warm thanks to eBay and the CCCB, Judith, and other collaborating institutions for holding this memorial event. And of course to Umut and his colleagues for setting up this wonderful prize, which will be awarded tonight. I've been asked to say a few words, as Fred Halliday was my best friend as well as my husband, and we lived together for close on for 50 years. During that time, we had our son Alex and traveled to innumerable places to learn about them and more often than not to write about them. We lived through the extraordinary times of post-colonial revolutions and together visited socialist Yemen, Cuba, Russian-occupied Afghanistan, and Soviet Central Asia, writing our only joint book, The Ethiopian Revolution, after a spell in Yemen and 2 trips to the Horn of Africa. Political Journeys was the title of one of Fred's last books, and it is aptly named, capturing 2 of his greatest passions, politics and travel. Fred had an insatiable appetite for travel, one driven by intellectual and political concerns, often a desire to challenge what he called bad arguments and sort out muddled ideas that he encountered on the left. Travel was linked to the fact that he was an extraordinarily gifted linguist. He loved languages and commanded more than 10 in the end, starting very young with German and French. Then it was Farsi, Arabic, Spanish, Italian, Portuguese,
and much later on, he started to learn Russian and, of course, Catalan. His journeys always excited and stimulated him and led to a prolific output of books, journal and newspaper articles, and even a television series on the Cold War. Fred was a great speaker and was the quintessential public intellectual in that he believed in getting his ideas across to a wider public. He welcomed debate, and he took a good deal of flack when passions were stirred too vigorously. Post 9/11, Fred threw himself into the acrid fray over political Islam. While some sectors of the left saw groups like Hezbollah and its British supporters as allies in an anti-imperialist struggle, Fred meticulously exposed the fallacy of their arguments in a raft of public debates and writings. By the mid-80s, he had joined me in being a defender and advocate of human rights, of universal values, and he developed his intellectual and political commitment to the principles of secularism, cosmopolitanism, and internationalism. In fact, he was working on a book on cosmopolitanism right up until the end of his life. Barcelona was part of his journeying. His time there opened a new chapter in his life. He loved the city, who wouldn't? And he loved eBay for giving him an intellectually stimulating context, great colleagues, students, and friends like Umut. The city charmed him, and its politics fascinated him, although he wrote that he decided to avoid involvement in internal Catalan debates, following the advice of his father, never forget you are in someone else's country. Fred lamented the lack of international knowledge and interest in Catalonia, which he felt was undeserved, and attributed it in part to the images promoted by the tourist industry, some of which he was scathing about, instancing, among others, quote, the most ugly edifice of La Sagrada Familia, which nauseatingly calls itself an expiatory temple. During his years in Barcelona, he wrote a series of essays for Open Democracy and La Vanguardia, and finished a book on Francisco Camaño of the Dominican Republic that I was able to publish in the series that I edit for Palgrave, Studies of the Americas. He kept a wary eye on Catalan nationalism, but was determined to learn more about it and do the best he could to learn Catalan. He even employed a teacher, a Palestinian translator from Los Angeles, who was given the nickname of Abu Tahoma, the father of translation. The weekly meetings with Abu Tahoma were a particular joy for the lively exchange of cultural and linguistic anecdotes that the two engaged in. Fred said that he loved the fact that he could, quote, get up every morning and know that I would have to work in 3 languages. In one of his essays for Open Democracy that deals with Barcelona, he describes it as one of the most interesting, if not the most interesting and stimulating cities in the world. He was not blind to its dark side, the criminal underworlds that served migration and drugs mafias and the corruption that attended it. But he writes, this did not diminish the fact that the Catalan people have in Barcelona created one of the truly greatest, most beautiful, most varied, most humane and creative of cities. The civic commitment and the urban planning, the aesthetic skill evident in this city, he concluded, should be a model for the rest of the world. It is fitting then that this prize in honor of Fred should be awarded by eBay in Fred's favorite city. He was always a great supporter of his students and of young scholars, and would have been absolutely delighted to know that the prize would be going to support and recognize a fine scholar for doing work in his areas of intellectual interest and passion. Thanks again to colleagues at eBay for supporting this great initiative, and very warm congratulations to the winner of the Fred Halliday Prize. Thank you.
think that great historical events or great tragedies present a special kind of intellectual and moral challenge to all of us, and also should make us a bit modest, a bit unsure of ourselves. Because on many of the issues that we're discussing, we simply don't know what is going to happen. Podría decir que de todas las ciudades del Mediterráneo que yo conozco, hay tres que tienen este carácter. Hay Estambul, hay Beirut y hay Barcelona. Son las tres. Con esta vida social, esta vida de comida, esta vida de música, esta vida de intelectual que tienen. Y que este cosmopolitanismo cultural de los intelectuales y de los pueblos en general es una cosa muy frágil. Este asunto de la seguridad y la confrontación con terroristas no es un conflicto entre Europa civilizada y países musulmanes. Es un conflicto que se reproduce y viene de estos países mismos. Hay un desafío aquí que es muy práctico. Necesitamos entrenar jóvenes expertos y gente en estas cosas. Es un deber intelectual y político de tratar de desarrollar, como en la inmigración, como en la seguridad, como en la política de transporte, un entendimiento común europeo del laicismo. Yo de Irlanda vengo de una familia de clase media muy anticlerical. Mi padre prohibió la entrada de los sacerdotes en la casa solamente para jugar póker a las cartas y que tienen que perder. Eso fue las condiciones, nada más.
أدبك تكون رواية احكيلي على ناس زمان احكيلي على ألف ليلة وليلة ولا لونجة بنت الغولة ولا ولد السلطان حاجيتك ما جيتك ودينا بعيد مدى الدنيا.
Cuando hablamos de cultura, de identidad, el sang coule, hay sangre, el sangre corre, hay gente que matan en estas cosas. Y la historia de Estambul, como de Bagdad, como de Tel Aviv, como de Teherán, como de Beirut, también es una historia de matanzas y intolerancia.
It's strange that in this age of travel and globalization, if you look around the Mediterranean and the hinterland of the Mediterranean, to include Jerusalem, Baghdad, Sarajevo, Cairo, of the 12 or 15 cosmopolitan cities which existed a century ago, only two have survived. Istanbul and Barcelona, the only two.
Pero hay dos otras cosas en que esta revolución fue particular que si miramos solamente religión no vemos. Uno es que esta revolución es la única moderna revolución en la historia que no tenía como antecedente una crisis del Estado. Era el sueño de todos los revolucionarios europeos de hacer la revolución pacífica, casi pacíficamente, pero con armas políticas, no militares. Pero también es un país con un sentido del humor muy fuerte. Entonces me gustaría un día alguien escribe un libro de las bromas, anécdotas de la revolución iraní. Me recuerdo uno, durante la época antes de la caída del Shah, en los últimos meses, estaba a las 9 de la noche, como dice, el toque de, ¿cómo se dice? De todo el mundo tiene que estar en la casa, ¿no? ¿Cómo? Pues a las 7, 2 horas antes, estaba un grupo de soldados por la esquina y estaba un señor caminando por el otro lado. Y un soldado miró, se tomó el fusil y lo mató. Y el corporal o el sargento dice, ¿cómo haces eso? Son solamente las 7. Sí, pero es mi amiga Reza, vive muy lejos de aquí, no puede llegar a casa en 2 horas.
Dirty old town, dirty old town. Clouds are drifting across the moon. Cats are prowling on.
For some of us, this is not easy. But anyway, we wanted to create this award to remember this wonderful person, great teacher, well, in many ways, my second father. And as I said before, our aim was to recognize and support a mid-career scholar, who focuses on the areas that Fred is working, but also Fred's legacy. Now, we had a discussion about that, and the award selection committee, which consists of, by the way, I have to say, Pere Vilanova, Universitat de Barcelona IB, Marie Caldor, London School of Economics, Judith Tucker, Georgetown University, Yezid Saig, Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, Caterina Dalla Cura, London School of Economics, and I happen to be, the Hugh Jackman of this committee too. And two members of the committee are with us today, Pere and Caterina. Yezid is stuck in London. Hopefully he will join us tomorrow. And Judith and Marie promised that they will come one day. Anyway, one of the discussions that we had was how do we define Fred's legacy? Because that was Mary's words, Fred's legacy. And we kind of thought that the best and the most concise way of defining it is, of course, his geographical focus, which was Middle East and North Africa, but it included Iran. And in his later years, as you've seen in these videos, the Mediterranean. His disciplinary scope, from international relations to political economy, to historical sociology, his thematic contributions to the study of international relations, gender and revolution in particular, his methodological framework, which he described to me, I remember when I was 24 years old, a master's student in London, he used the words theoretically informed empirical analysis. So bringing theory and empirical analysis, comparative studies together, and last but certainly not the least, as Maxine also mentioned, the importance of knowing and speaking languages. With this in mind, we launched the award and we've received 12 amazing applications. It was a huge ordeal to decide, to make a choice, to make a ranking among these 12 great scholars. And we decided that it would be only fair to refer first to the shortlist, because we couldn't want to just do some ranking. So the shortlist of the first Fred Halliday Award consisted of Dr. Rafi Ziada, lecturer at King's College London, Department of International Development, Roberto Rocco, King's College, coincidence, Department of European and International Studies, and Jamie Ellison, senior lecturer at the University of Edinburgh. And the winner is unanimously number one in all committee members' list is senior lecturer Jamie Ellison.
Hi.
Now, I would like to, well, just a brief note before leaving the floor for a quick word to Jamie, that we met today, officially. He is a senior lecturer in politics and international relations at the University of Edinburgh, where he teaches courses on the politics and international relations of the Middle East. He is the author of The Age of Counter-Revolution, States and Revolutions in the Middle East, which is published by Cambridge University Press in 2022. and earlier, The Struggle for the State in Jordan, IB Tourist 2016, which is the co-winner of the Jadaliya Political Economy Book Prize. He is also a member of the Salvage Editorial Collective. The committee wanted to acknowledge Jamie's work because it did reflect, we thought, Fred's legacy in many respects, being situated, to use Jamie's own words from his cover letter, at the point of intersection between Middle East studies, international relations theory, historical sociology. So his work moves between close analysis of class struggles on the ground and global trends in transformation and cooperation across borders among ruling elites, a pas de deux that sheds new light on the revolutions and counter-revolutions of the 21st century in the Arab world. Jamie's work is also informed by a refined Marxist approach and a deep historical context. By attending to history, he is able to reveal how the counter-revolutions of our days are not epiphenomenal, but rather intricately connected to the past ideologies and social practices of developmentalist national regimes. In this context, the committee is particularly taken by his hypothesis that the transformation of agrarian social classes in the Arab world in the later 20th century provided the basis for new forms of counter-revolution rooted in financialized security elites rather than labor repressive landlords. And his new research, tracing the relationship between different systems of energy use and transformation and centralization of political power, is extremely innovative conceptually and methodologically. Congratulations, Jamie.
Thank you very much. Is everything okay? Sound and vision is okay?
Yes, yes.
Yeah? Okay, great. So, well, first of all, I didn't meet Fred. We corresponded briefly, but I never met him. But I know he was a great linguist, so he might appreciate if I borrow a word from Yiddish to say that I am verklempt, which means I'm overcome. I'm overcome with a sense of gratitude and, frankly, astonishment that in such a field of such amazing scholars that you've given this to me. I'm so thankful to the committee, to eBay, to CCB, to Blanquerna Universitat Glamon Lul, to all of you in the Barcelona Summer School, which sounds like such a wonderful, fantastic initiative, to Umut and to Maxime Molyneux. So it's really, I'm full of gratitude, and it's such an honor to receive this award named for a great man and a great scholar. I think it's rather nice that an award named for an Irishman is being given to a Scotsman by a Catalan institution. It's quite good. I couldn't do justice to Fred Halliday's work or even his influence on me in 5 weeks, let alone 5 minutes. And I wish I was there to be with you at this great summer school. Unfortunately, I'm at British Middle East Studies Conference in St Andrews, but it's appropriate, I think, because it was as an undergraduate here 20 years ago, more in fact, I first encountered Fred's work like a bolt from the blue, especially Rethinking International Relations, Arabia Without Sultans, and I devoured everything he wrote, but those two, and Islam and the Myth of Confrontation. And since those very first readings, I think I've been responding to his positions, not reaching the same conclusions, of course. I think it would be, he's not somebody who shied away from polemical political difference either, and I think that we would probably reach different conclusions, but always responding to and grateful for those positions that he took. The starting point was always there, and especially He wrote in Arabia Without Sultans about getting rid of what he called the exotic and mystified flummery of the study of the Middle East, which I really appreciated and I've tried to carry on, but also made me think about how actually IR has also been filled with exotic and mystified flummery as a whole. And what he showed, and this has been such a great influence on me and others, is that one can treat and one must look at international relations as part of the social world. And therefore the social world also is part of the international world. That one can do this as a social science based on what he referred to as analytical universalism, which I think reflected a political universalism, necessarily so. And I've tried to carry that on through my work, and especially, of course, in my most recent book, I don't think I could even have conceived of how to do it, of how to address these momentous issues, movements, crisis that have occurred across the region that Professor Kandiyoti was speaking about, without the background, without the starting point of revolution, the sixth world power, which is an amazing contribution, which, as I say, I don't think I could have certainly done without. And again, I'm just enormously grateful for it being there and for receiving the award named in honor of the man who wrote it. I think, as I say, I could go on for a long time about Fred's scholarship, his influence, especially, I would say, his clarity, which I think also derived from political commitment, even to the extent that the content of that might have changed over the years, but understanding always that we don't write or act in removed from the world, and that if you're writing stuff that people can't understand, not interested in, and that you can't explain to an audience of reasonable people, then there's something wrong with you and not with the audience. And I think that was always clear in his writing, and we saw in his lectures as well. I was especially taken, by the way, I really loved that Dirty Old Town, the Ewan MacColl song, was playing at the end, which is one of my favourites. And also my dad claimed that actually Ewan MacColl wrote it about the sort of Irish area of Middlesbrough that he was raised in. But I don't think that's true. But it was quite a nice little sort of personal connection that I felt I didn't know might have been there. But kind of to finish up, I don't want to take too much of your time. I'd just like to say thank you again. I'm so grateful and so honoured, really enormously honoured by this award. And I hope that not just me, but all of us can carry on the kind of legacy of work that Fred laid the basis for. And I wish you all the very best of luck with the summer school. I think it's a wonderful initiative. I think it's a great way to take forward that legacy. Only sorry that I couldn't be there with you. I might not be able to hang around too long either, because I'm going to have to attend the conference dinner. But just once again, thank you very much, and best of luck to everyone.
Once again, congratulations, Jamie, and thank you very much for being with us today. Thank you very much, CCCB, for hosting us. Well, thank you very much for being our family. Have a nice evening. Oh, and as Narcís Serra said, this is the first, but not the last summer school.